Hello, and welcome to the weekly economic brief. My name is Dr. Lindsay Piegza, Chief Economist at Stifel. Last week, the market shifted its focus from fiscal policy back to monetary policy, with the Fed's latest policy announcement midweek Wednesday. As expected, the committee opted to keep interest rates steady in a range of 4.25% to 4.5% for the second consecutive month, with the language of the accompanying statement also little changed from January. According to the statement, the Fed continues to see growth as, quote, solid, with the unemployment rate stabilizing at a low level. Inflation, meanwhile, remains somewhat elevated, omitting any suggestion of progress towards the committee's 2% target, now for the second consecutive month. In achieving its goals of both maximum employment and stable prices, the committee noted it will remain attentive to the risks to both sides of its dual mandate, while removing language that such risks are roughly in balance, and instead highlighting a rising level of, quote, uncertainty. Recall in the January FOMC meeting minutes, a number of officials pointed to the latest fiscal policy agenda as a specific source of uncertainty. Additionally, the latest Summary of Economic Projections, or the SEP, shows an expectation for higher inflation and slower growth, resulting in no change to the median forecast for policy. Again, underscoring the expected impact of tariffs, the committee increased its headline inflation forecast from 2.5 to 2.7% and from 2.5 to 2.8% for the core in the current year. Although policymakers left the outlook relatively unchanged at 2.2% for 2026 and remain optimistic in reaching the 2% price target by 2027. The growth outlook, meanwhile, was revised down from 2.1 to 1.7% in the current year, and from 2% down to 1.8% next year, reflecting expectations for more moderate consumer activity. Finally, the unemployment rate forecast was little changed at 4.4% for 2025 and 4.3% for 2026. Taken together, the committee continues to anticipate two rate reductions by year end, although the forecasts surrounding the median were somewhat more compressed towards the hawkish end of the spectrum. In December, for example, 5 officials anticipated more than 2 cuts, but now only 2 members anticipate more than 50 basis points in rate reductions. Alternatively, 1 member anticipated no further adjustments to rates as of December, while as of the March forecast, that has increased. Now 4 anticipate the Fed potentially holding steady through year end. During the press conference, Chair Powell underscored the increased uncertainty surrounding the outlook and the potential pathway for rates, but noted that the economy is healthy and the potential inflationary effects from tariffs will likely prove transitory. In other Fed news, last week President Trump nominated Fed Governor Michelle Bowman to take the top regulatory position at the Federal Reserve as the Vice Chair of Supervision. The role was previously held by Michael Barr, who stepped down in February as speculation grew that the Trump administration would seek a replacement. Shortly after the announcement of Barr's departure, Bowman's name was floated on a short list of potential replacements. She was originally appointed by President Trump during his first term back in April of 18 and has furthermore been a very vocal critic of Barr's efforts to impose tougher rules on the banking sector. Also last week, along with the Fed's March rate decision, investors continued to digest an onslaught of economic data, beginning with an updated look at the consumer, as the latest retail spending report exacerbated concerns of more moderate spending. Retail sales rose 0.2 in February, falling well short of the 0.6% rise expected, albeit a 2-month high. Year-over-year retail sales remain positive, up 3.1%, still marking, however, the weakest pace in 4 months. Looking at the details, there were some gains. Non-store retailers, for example, rose 2.4%. Health and personal care sales jumped 1.7%. Food and beverage sales increased 0.4 in February, and general merchandise sales eked out a rise of 0.2. On the other hand, there was a notable amount of weakness, with declines in everything from electronics to clothing and furniture, sporting goods to autos. In fact, 7 of the 13 categories posted declines in the second month of the year. Stripping out the more volatile components of autos and gasoline, core retail sales fell a lesser 0.5% in February and increased 3.5% year over year. Excluding food, autos, building materials, and gasoline station sales, control group sales, meanwhile, increased 1% in February, the largest gain in 5 months. In fact, over the past 12 months, control group sales rose 4.4%, a 2 month high. While an improvement in spending activity relative to the start of the year, consumers remain hesitant to ramp up purchases amid ample uncertainty and unknowns, coupled with an anticipation of higher rates of inflation. An erosion of consumer confidence is taking a toll on both a willingness and ability to spend, potentially limiting then upside potential for broader based growth in the first quarter. Still, at an average pace of no growth thus far in the new year, relative to a minimal gain of 0.3% in the first 2 months of the fourth quarter, this somewhat modest spread suggests consumers may be vocalizing more concern than they are adjusting actual behavior. Turning back to the economic calendar, also last week, an updated look at the housing market showed a welcome recovery in construction, at least in February. However, the pop in activity may prove short lived as tariff uncertainty and unease appears to be curtailing permit growth and thus future building activity. As several builders have noted, looming tariffs are creating considerable uncertainty regarding costs and therefore limiting a willingness to prop up new building activity. Housing starts jumped over 11% in February, well surpassing the 1.4% rise expected, and pulling the annual pace up from 1.4 to 1.5 million, a 2 month high. Year over year, however, housing starts fell nearly 3% in February, the sixth consecutive month of annual decline. Building permits, meanwhile, fell 1.2% in February, lowering the annual pace slightly to 1.5 million, a 4 month low. Year over year, building permits dropped nearly 7% in the second month of the year, marking now 13 consecutive months of negative activity. And also last week, existing home sales unexpectedly rose over 4% to a 4.3 million unit pace, a 2 month high. Year over year, however, existing home sales fell 1.2% in the second month of 25, the first annual decline since September. And finally, from a cost standpoint, the median price of a previously owned home rose nearly 4% in February from a year earlier to just shy of 400,000, the highest price in 2 months. This week, the economic calendar is again quite robust, beginning today with a look at the Chicago Fed National Activity Index and the preliminary S&P Global U.S. Manufacturing, Services, and Composite PMIs. Tomorrow, we'll take a look at some housing data with the FHFA Home Price Index and the S&P Case-Shiller 20-city and national price indices, along with February new home sales. Additionally, the March Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index will be released on Tuesday. Remember, last month, consumer confidence dropped 7 points to a reading of 98.3, the lowest level in 8 months. This month, confidence is expected to decline again, potentially falling to a reading of 94 in March and marking the lowest reading since January of 21. Also on Tuesday, we'll take a look at the regional Richmond Fed Index and the final read of February building permits. Turning to Wednesday, we begin with weekly mortgage applications, followed by February durable goods orders. After rising a larger than expected 3.1% in January, durable goods orders are expected to decline 0.2 in February, potentially marking a 2 month low. Over the past 12 months, durables are expected to rise 1.5%, about half of the 3.4% increase at the start of the year. On Thursday, we'll start with weekly jobless claims and turn to the first highlight of the week, the final round Q4 GDP report. GDP was unrevised at a 2.3% gain in the second round report as expected. In this final round Q4 report, however, GDP is expected to be revised higher to 2.4%, still, however, potentially marking the slowest pace in 3 quarters. Also on Thursday, we'll take a look at pending home sales and the March Kansas City Fed Manufacturing Index. And on Friday, another key report looking at February's personal income and consumption, along with the latest read on the PCE, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge. Personal consumption is expected to rise 0.6 in February and 5.6% on an annual basis, potentially matching the gain in January and still within the average established since June of 23. Income, meanwhile, is expected to rise 0.3 in February and 4.6% year over year, unchanged from January's pace and still perpetuating an average pace of over 4% as it has since the start of 24. And then the PCE. The PCE is expected to rise 0.3 in February, potentially matching the increase from the month prior, and 2.5% on an annual basis, also potentially matching the annual gain at the start of the year. Stripping out food and energy, the core PCE is also expected to rise 0.3 in February, again matching the gain of the month prior, and rise 2.7% year over year, potentially marking a 1/10 of a percentage point uptick from the pace reported in January. And wrapping up the week, also on Friday, the final March University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index will be released. And finally, on the FedSpeak front, we will hear from Richmond Fed President Thomas Barkin on Thursday this week. In the aftermath of the Fed's March rate decision, holding policy steady while emphasizing the likely transitory nature of inflationary pressures resulting from tariffs, the market will be listening for any additional indications as to the Fed's expectations for future policy adjustments in the coming months. And with that, I'd like to thank you for starting your week with Stifel.